Okay, what is going on? Genuinely, I am really confused. The film industry is booming, there's more period dramas now than ever in history probably, and yet it feels like things are somehow getting worse. Despite movie budgets being bigger than ever, that does not realistically mean that movie costume makers enjoy unlimited freedom. In fact, it sometimes feels like the days of really lush period productions are just gone now. Even if we do get historical films that boast a huge number of expensive costumes, it barely ever reaches the level of golden age movie costuming that we reached a couple of decades ago. When you compare historical costumes from period dramas made in the previous century to the ones made now, the difference is jarring. Let me just say that. It's not looking good. It's not looking good for us. I'm not talking about the design because I do believe that we went far since then in terms of being creative, in terms of storytelling through costumes, in terms of putting a creative twist on history. I think all that is fantastic. I'm talking quality. Everything just looks much cheaper. And it's not just me being snarky. It's a lot of people noticing that. Okay, we don't know yet what vibe the new Wuthering Heights movie is going for, but this just looks odd. This looks like a Team Veil. We all know the controversy with the new Snow White movie. I personally think it was blown out of proportions, and I will staunchly defend Rachel Zegler because I think she was done wrong. But I do agree that the costumes are just off. They're just not working. It's just blah. And the elements used are just looking cheap now. Then finally, we also have first shots from Nolan's The Odyssey, and I don't understand what the hell is going on there. Look at the helmet, it straight up looks plastic. What is that? So what contributes to the cheap look? What makes a costume look cheap? I would say it comes down to ruining the viewer's suspension of disbelief. Obviously, if we watch a period piece, we want to feel immersed in the period. We don't watch a period drama to remember that it was made in modern times. That's not the point. Even the films that play with the idea of a period drama, but there are modern elements in it, they still work because they make the period part believable. Elsie's mom is like, no, I have to do something about this. And they had to live with complete strangers, much older than them. There were hundreds of female-owned businesses. Where do fairies come from, evolutionary-wise? What she's done, it's like not a way to treat people. My pants. I would be so excited. One day she just left house to live with a man. You'd probably think, okay, someone was a prostitute, they got caught. She left home at 15. Someone stole something. No, you're not Why ready. Does this sound like it was written yesterday? If we can sense that the costumes were made in the modern times, if we can sense that they were not worn out properly, if we can sense that they don't fit the way they would fit back then, it takes us out of that historical immersion. But let's analyze two factors that film production has struggled with since the beginning of that medium, basically. Money and time. It is a truth universally acknowledged that movie production is a bottomless pit where money falls and it just disappears. Now, historical movies, historical TV shows are so bottomless that cave divers want to know their location. However, despite the fact that it's so expensive and despite the fact that the budgets keep growing year after year, the costume department still only gets a chunk of that budget, obviously. And of course, the crew, the personnel, the costumers deserve to be well paid. So most of that budget that is allocated for costumes, it goes towards the people and the people's salaries. Honestly, let me just say that I'd rather see poor costumes. I'd rather see costumes of a little less quality than what we're used to if people are getting fairly paid. I'd rather see that than magnificent, amazing costumes made by people that basically slaved away their time for barely any money. Let me be clear about that. And this might be the sad truth, actually. It might be the case that the most wonderful, the most spectacular historical costumes in cinema were created off of the backs of overworked costumers. However, A, costumers are still overworked, even if for slightly better money, and B, I don't think there is an B. Let's move on. Production companies rarely share the way they allocated the budget, so it's difficult to say how much money actually goes towards the costumes unless you're directly in that industry. But I did find a breakdown of the budget for M. Night Shyamalan's The Village. And I know the movie is from 2004, so a lot of things have changed since then, and also it's not really a typical period drama, but I still think it's a decent example. So according to the breakdown, the movie itself cost 71 million, of which 1.4 million was allocated to the costume department. This money obviously does not go directly to like literal costumes and materials because, as I said, people need to be paid. So costume designer was paid $333,000. Other costume department members such as wardrobe supervisor, costumers, tailors and seamstresses, wardrobe assistants, anyone else involved with the costumes were paid around $460K in total. And wardrobe purchases, whatever that was in this case, were signed off as $600,000. It's up for interpretation whether or not that's a lot of money, but even if that's a lot of money, that's still 1/70th of a budget. I think the argument of the lack of money in movie productions being allocated to the costumes makes less sense when you take into account people like cosplayers or hobbyist costumers, because we prove time and time again that it is possible to create things on a shoestring budget. When I was starting out my historical costuming journey, I was really broke. I was a student and I could spend around $10 each month on my costuming hobby. So I have just searched thrift shops for bed sheets and I have stolen my parents' curtains, and I made an 1890s Victorian jacket out of a used IKEA blanket, and I'll be damned if it doesn't look good. I've also dressed a bunch of extras on like a student film project for around like $50. I just bought bed sheets, cut them up, and made some headpieces. So I'm not saying these were all great things because I was still a beginner, but it is possible, if you're really smart about it, to make things with little money and they can still look good. All you need is creativity and time, which brings us to the second part of my thesis, which is there is not enough time. There's not enough time. So if money issues in movie making are getting less pressing, then unfortunately, that's not the issue with time. We are making movies quite fast now, mainly because there is a lot of them. For example, Bridgerton costume department had to make 7,500 pieces in about 5 months. And I broke it down because I was interested in how it worked. And obviously my math is completely off because I don't know what the costume department was like. Maybe they allocated different jobs to several people. I don't know what their workflow is, if that makes sense. But there were 238 people creating 7,500 pieces. That included 5,000 costumes, so I'm assuming dresses, like outerwear, coats, suits, and the rest would probably be accessories, maybe underwear, etc. So let's assume 50 of those people were allocated to the accessory making. So they were hat makers, they were shoemakers, they were people making flowers, smaller elements that were used as decoration. That still leaves 2,500 pieces to be created by 50 people during those 5 months, which means 10 pieces a month, so 2 or more pieces a week, which I think if you're crafting a historical hat is like pretty intense. Like you only get literally 3 days for each piece. Similarly, 5,000 costumes that were made by the remaining 188 people. That means a single person had to make 5 pieces a month, so more than 1 costume a week. And as I said, that could be a ball gown, that could be a day dress, that could be a coat, which is more structured. And obviously, I know it doesn't work like that. It's not like you literally get assigned 1 costume and that's your job. It's usually spread between people that are assigned to different jobs. So you would have different people working as cutters, you would have different people working as seamstresses, embroiderers, etc. Everyone is sort of involved in a different stage of costume making, but I still think that's quite intense. Another example, Jacqueline Duran said that for Little Women, each costume took roughly 40 hours to make. And you may think, okay, that's like 1 week for a costume, that's not too bad for someone who's experienced and skilled, but I can bet it wasn't actually a week. I can bet it was 40 hours over like a 3-day span. They probably crammed those 40 hours in less amount of days, and it was immediately followed by another costume. Movie industry working hours are absolutely insane, so I definitely would not be surprised if people were doing like 16-hour shifts because they were running out of time. Again, time. Give people more time. Lack of time in movies is seriously a growing problem. We all know what happened to CGI. CGI is so much worse now than it was in early 2000s. That's insane. Considering the technology that we have, considering the improvements that the industry has made, that's actually insane. The fact that I can watch Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter and still be impressed, and then I see a Marvel movie and I'm like, Sims 4 has better graphics than this. Color grading is non-existent. Sound sucks. Everything in the movie industry is getting affected because people are just in a rush. And now we're also getting bland, sloppily fitted costumes. Because regardless of the intentions or skills of the designers and the makers, there is just not enough time to put enough care in the details. That is why, ironically, if you look at art house cinema, if you look at smaller historical movies, if you look at European period dramas, the costuming is often better than the big blockbuster movies. French and British, I think, are especially good at this. To be fair, those movies often require a much smaller amount of costumes because they're just smaller, but that's not always the case. For example, Corsage was pretty big in terms of the cast and the whole movie, and it only cost $8 million. For that money, I think the costumes are really good. Finally, we have Netflix's The Leopard, which is a tough one because the costumes from the iconic 1963 adaptation of the same book are arguably some of the best historical costumes ever designed for screen. And I might be biased and this might be subjective, but it is the truth and I will die on that hill. You could argue that they're a little conservative, that there is no modern twist on them, but that was precisely the case. They're supposed to look like they belong in the era, and they did a really good job at conveying that. They literally look like they were made in the 19th century. The costumes in the new adaptation, they're also very good. Don't get me wrong. And the costume designer was actually once mentored by Piero Tossi, who designed the original costumes in the 60s adaptation. There are even direct references to the original costuming in the series. And considering modern cinema, this is a stunning piece of costuming work. But because we have seen that before, because we have seen the exact same story before, our expectations can be set high. And we obviously compare the two versions and we compare the costumes, and considering what we used to have in cinema, in the TV, they just look cheaper. They just look cheaper. One of my theories is that modern fabrics just look cheaper, so it's more difficult to find fabrics that will look good on screen as historical garments. They are much poorer quality now, they are produced much faster, again, time, and they just look bulky, they look stiff, they don't have the historical feel. It takes ages to find something actually good. If you're a historical costumer, you will know that it takes a while to find good fabric. People don't have that while. They don't have the time to scan the internet looking for that perfect 1860s print because they are on a deadline, obviously. It's hard to find a fabric that behaves historically, if that makes sense. Another thing is that the camera quality keeps increasing, and I think that is also a factor because now we can see costumes in more detail than ever before, almost in microscopic detail, and it's maybe not a good thing. Maybe it was better to watch and witness the costumes on a grainy film because then we felt more immersed in the story instead of picking every thread apart. It was much easier to believe a historical costume when you didn't see it up close. So overall, it all comes down to capitalism, I think. As long as the movie industry will be solely focused on profit, and that will keep going for a good while. Let's be honest here. And it has always been the case, yes, but in a way people were, their mission was still exploring art and exploring film as a medium, versus now we're like, okay, we have it figured out, so now we can just make money. As long as that's the case, we will probably keep getting much worse and worse costumes over time, and they might keep getting modernized for the modern audience just because it's cheaper, honestly. And there might not be much detail because, again, it's not suited for the minimalist modern eye, which is not true, but that's the way people like to think because that saves them money. The only thing we can do as a viewer is show genuine appreciation when someone does a genuinely good job. I don't want to end on an everything used to be better note, but art and money making have rarely worked out together, and the worsening quality of movie costumes is a good witness to that, I think. That's all I have to say, and let me rewatch some good movies now. Bye!